joined by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. He is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, on which he served for many years with Secretary Rubio. He's also the chair of the Republican Conference in the Senate, making him the third-ranking Republican in the Senate. Senator Cotton, good Monday to you. What do you make of how Hamas is either complying with or defying the terms of the agreement that Donald Trump put into place?
I mean, Hugh, from best I can tell, they're doing as little as possible to try to present a facade of compliance. So President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu don't allow the IDF to go back in guns blazing. And as the president has said, he doesn't have much patience for it. So he wants all the remaining, the outstanding remains of the deceased hostages to be returned promptly. And he's going to insist that Hamas disarm and be no part of the governance of Gaza. And I think anything short of that, you're going to see heightened IDF operations inside Gaza.
Now, the security force that is supposed to assemble, like Avengers Assemble, has been variously described as being Turks, Qataris, Emiratis, with a dash of Americans and Spaniards thrown in. What's your understanding of what this force is going to be and where they're going to deploy?
Well, first off, Hugh, I don't believe it would include American forces. Israel, almost alone in the world, certainly in that region, has never asked America to put our troops on the ground to support any of their operations. They fight their own fights. Now, we might have some presence inside of Israel proper as a coordinating and logistical cell. I believe we have a couple hundred troops there performing that mission already, but I don't expect any American combat troops to be inside of Gaza at any point. Hugh, I would say I have measured operations for such an international force, just considered what the international force in southern Lebanon has done over the last 20 years, largely allowed Hezbollah to build up its own militia, as it created itself as almost a state within a state until Israel devastated Hezbollah's leadership last year. Now, that's not to say you might not have some kind of international force under the auspices of the United Nations, say, providing static defenses at critical sites like food distribution warehouses or hospitals or other key infrastructure. But I find it far-fetched to believe that such an international force would ever go out and actively disarm Hamas's fairly well-armed remnants. I think that is going to be left to the Israeli Defense Forces, just as it kind of has been in South Lebanon for the last 20 years.
Now, if Turkey gets involved, can you give us your assessment of that? Because I've been to Istanbul a couple of times, but I really don't know much about Turkey other than the secular promise of the post-World War I Turkey has been sort of forfeited by President Erdogan. It's become sort of an Islamist country with Muslim Brotherhood ties. Are they an ally you would trust to keep the peace?
Well, Hugh, it's not really so much a question of whether you or I would trust them to keep the peace. It's a matter of whether Israel, acting through its elected government, would trust them to keep the peace. And as you heard Secretary Rubio say over the weekend, any forces inside of Gaza have to be from a nation that Israel would support and wouldn't cause discomfort with Israel. So ultimately, that's a question I would say for Israel to decide primarily among which nations are willing to commit troops. And I know that voices inside the Israeli government have already expressed misgivings about the prospect of having Turkish troops inside of Gaza. Turkey, like Qatar, is really one of the two nations in the Middle East that still largely subscribes to the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. Most other Arab nations have not just moved beyond it, but have actively tried to eliminate the influence of that terrorist group inside of their countries. So I understand why Turkey would have misgivings, but in the end, of course, it's not up to you and me. It's really up to the government of Israel.
Well put. When I was younger, Turkey was our favorite friend in the Middle East after the fall of the Shah, and they were a NATO ally, and they were a democratic state, and they're still a democratic state, but Erdogan plays hardball, and he's arrested a lot of his people. How do you feel about them being in NATO long term? Are you still confident of their reliability as part of the NATO alliance?
Well, they provide a lot of advantages to NATO. Of course, they have the second largest military after our own. They're on the southern shore of the Black Sea, which is key terrain, especially as long as Russia continues its unprovoked war of aggression inside of Ukraine. But there's also no question that they've been a difficult ally at times. And over the last 25 years or so, as President Erdogan and his party has been in power, it's made for some tough times. But I do think on balance, we're probably better to keep them inside of NATO than not have them inside of NATO. Again, I wish they would be better partners on many matters, but they've been pretty good partners on a lot of different things over the years. And I think as a whole, the security situation in both Europe and the Middle East is probably better with Turkey remaining a NATO ally.
So what is the Erdogan vision for Turkey, if you have any guesstimates on that? I don't know if you've been able to go there on a Codel or not, but do you have a good idea of how you would articulate what his ambition is for that country? Because it is so important.
I've been there before. It's been many years. Again, I do think that the government has trended away from the secularism of modern Turkey over the last 25 years as President Erdogan and his party has been in power. At the same time, he also wants to be part of the Western world. That's why he's in NATO. That's why he's pursued membership in the European Union in the past. That's why he's been helpful in various ways to Europe and to Ukraine during Russia's war inside of Ukraine. It would be better, though, if the government of Turkey, like the government of Qatar, would completely cast out brotherhood ideology, as so many of our other Arab friends in the region have.
All right, last question has to do with the obvious, the shutdown. I have no hope that it will reopen this week until after the elections of next week, and only then if they get a jolt, Democrats get a jolt. What's your expectation now, Senator Cotton?
Well, Hugh, regrettably, you may be right. The Democrats are still scared to death of their radical left-wing base. That's why the government is closed. It has nothing to do with health care. That's just a pretext that Chuck Schumer lit upon because he was scared of his radical left-wing base and, frankly, scared for his own hide and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez challenging him. But the hardships are genuinely beginning to pile up, Hugh. The Trump administration has done what they can within the limits of the law and uncommitted funds to try to minimize that, for instance, by finding the money to pay our troops last week. But pretty soon, those uncommitted funds will run out, and legal authority cannot be stretched any further. You're going to see our troops not being paid, federal employees missing a second paycheck, almost 250,000 Arkansans who depend on the food stamp program or the Women, Infants, and Children's program to provide food for their table. I was just in Clarksville, Arkansas last week, and I heard from teachers who are worried about what it means for needy families with students in their classes, or a National Guardsman who's very worried about his next paycheck and his troops' next paycheck. So these hardships are going to start getting much more severe, and the Democrats shouldn't be using them as quote-unquote leverage, which is what a senior House Democrat called them last week. We don't think needy families and our troops are leverage. We think that's a problem that we could promptly solve if the Democrats would just come to their senses.
It's a shameful episode, but a Seinfeld shutdown about nothing is the definition of the Schumer shutdown. Senator Tom Cotton, always good to talk to you. Thank you, Senator.